My name is Evadne Whitmore, and at 70 years old I still carried myself with the briskness of a librarian who had spent decades hushing children in story hour and guiding students through research papers. Retirement had softened my schedule, but not my spirit. I believed this morning would be the beginning of something I had long promised myself, my first real vacation. A cruise out of Charleston Harbor. A week at sea with my son Thomas, his wife Clarissa, and my grandchildren. The port bustled with travelers, a blur of straw hats, wheeled luggage, and the mingled scents of sunscreen and sea air. I wore my new sun hat wide-brimmed, cream with a navy ribbon, and kept one hand steady on the handle of my modest suitcase. Inside were 3 dresses I had chosen carefully, imagining the formal dinners on board where I could sit with my family, proud and included. For a moment, standing in line at the terminal, I allowed myself to breathe in happiness. My late husband had always dreamed of seeing the Caribbean, and though he never lived long enough, I would finally taste it with the people who carried his name forward. The buzz of my phone broke the reverie. I slipped it from my purse, expecting a message about where to meet. Instead, the words on the screen blurred as if they couldn't possibly be real. Change of plans. You're not coming. It's only a family trip. My daughter-in-law's name, Clarissa, glowed at the top. At first, I thought it must be a mistake. My thumb hovered, waiting for a correction, some apology, but no other message came. My throat tightened as though the humid air had thickened into rope. Slowly, I raised my eyes to the ship's upper deck. There they were, Thomas, with his arm draped casually over Clarissa's shoulders. My grandchildren leaning over the railing to point at something in the water. Laughter floated down to me, bright and careless. Clarissa adjusted her sunglasses, guiding the children back toward the boarding doors. My son glanced at his phone then, the faint glow lighting his face. And I knew he was checking if I had read her words. Our eyes never met. The crowd surged forward, port staff calling for boarding groups. I stood motionless, suitcase at my feet, sun hat trembling in my hands. In that moment, surrounded by strangers heading off on adventures, I felt as though the ground beneath Charleston's pier had tilted, setting me adrift before the ship even left the harbor. When I was 39, a heart attack carried my husband off in the middle of an ordinary January night. The shock of it left me hollow, but there was no time to collapse. Thomas was only 12. Bills stacked quickly, and grief had to share a table with responsibility. I took longer hours at the Charleston Public Library, cataloging until my eyes blurred, then tutored neighborhood children in the evenings to stretch each paycheck. Those years trained me to count every dime. I patched shoes with glue, darned socks until the fabric could bear no more, and made casseroles stretch into 2 suppers. Thomas never noticed. Or at least I tried to make sure he didn't. He had new notebooks when school began, money for field trips, and the freedom to dream of more than I had ever known. By the time he graduated college, first in our family to do so, I believed the hardest years were behind us. When he married Clarissa, radiant in lace at a church on Meeting Street, I felt proud and relieved. I wanted them to start life on steady ground. So I funneled decades of savings into a house on the edge of the city. A modest 2-story with azaleas in the yard. I signed the deed myself, knowing full well it would remain in my name until the mortgage was finished. At first, I visited often, dropping off Sunday dinners, helping paint the nursery when their first child came along. But slowly, the invitations thinned. Thanksgiving was just too hectic this year. Christmas gifts were unwrapped with polite smiles, then set aside. When I reached too eagerly for the children, Clarissa's voice carried a warning edge. They need boundaries. Evadne. Little by little, I realized my place was shrinking. My son's laughter still came easily when he saw me, but always with Clarissa beside him, steering the conversation, deciding how long I could stay. Each small exclusion felt like a pebble placed in my pocket. I carried them quietly, certain they would weigh me down one day, back at my townhouse. Silence pressed in like a heavy quilt. I set my suitcase against the wall and went straight to the old roll-top desk in the corner, the one piece of furniture I had kept from my parents' house. Inside, neatly labeled folders waited like quiet witnesses. My hands shook only once before I steadied them and pulled the blue folder marked Whitmore Residence, 2007. The papers smelled faintly of dust and ink. Page after page bore my name, Evadne Whitmore, in black type. The mortgage statement, stamped paid in full, dated just 2 months prior, sat on top. I had written the last check myself, the sum pulled from my retirement savings. They had celebrated a new kitchen that spring, never asking how it had been covered. I sat back, staring at the tidy line of my signature. Whatever story Thomas and Clarissa told themselves, the truth lay here. The house was mine. The law had not forgotten. I lifted the phone and dialed the number I hadn't used in years. Mr. Redfern. My voice caught, but steadied. This is Evadne. I need to ask you something about property rights. He remembered me. Our families had attended the same church once. Patiently, he explained what I already suspected. The deed is solely in your name. You can sell, rent, refinance, whatever you wish. They have no legal claim unless you choose to transfer it. For a long moment, I said nothing. My eyes traced the curve of my signature. The ink pressed firm as if I had known this day would come. Rage rose, hot and bitter, but beneath it pulsed a strange calm. Every dismissal, every exclusion, every forced smile, suddenly they had weight and shape. The house they called theirs was not theirs at all. It was mine, and for the first time in years, I felt power return to my hands. The spare key rested in my palm, cool and accusing. Clarissa had pressed it into my hand years ago with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. For emergencies, Evadne, we trust you. That day I had felt touched, believing it was an invitation to remain woven into their lives. Now, sliding it into the lock, the words felt like an old joke I had failed to understand. The house smelled of lemon polish and something faintly floral, a scent Clarissa preferred over the cinnamon I used to keep. The living room looked neat, curated, as if for a magazine spread. My eyes went straight to the wall of photographs. The earlier frames still held me Thomas in cap and gown with my arm around him. The first birthday party, where I held a frosting-smeared toddler. But as the years moved forward along the wall, I disappeared. Family portraits of 4. Vacations at the beach, holidays by the tree without me. I wandered further, into the guest room I once slept in. The quilt I had sewn during long winter evenings lay folded, pushed into the closet behind a stack of plastic bins. Gifts I had given over the years, books, small antiques, framed maps were nowhere in sight. In their place stood sleek furniture, impersonal and new. In Thomas's study, the order was less careful. Papers cluttered the desk. Bills, school reports. One manila envelope bore a Charleston law firm's name I did not recognize. I pulled it free and opened it, heart thudding. Inside lay a draft document titled Transfer of Title, my name at the top, their names waiting at the bottom, dated 3 months prior, unsigned. I gripped the paper until my knuckles whitened. So, it was never forgetfulness. Never a matter of we'll handle it later. It was deliberate. They had waited for the mortgage to vanish, planning to nudge me into handing it over when the timing suited them. The air in the room shifted. Betrayal was no longer a vague suspicion. It was here, spelled out in legal language, sharper than any knife. Marjorie had been a friend since our days together at the library, both of us shelving books and trading whispered gossip between the stacks. In retirement, she had turned her sharp eye for detail toward real estate, and when I called her, she didn't hesitate. "Bring me the papers, Evie," she said, her voice steady as always. "If you're ready, I'll handle the rest." Within days, she had a pair of buyers, young professionals from Atlanta, both doctors, eager for a quick purchase near the hospital. They wanted a home they could move into immediately, cash in hand. The speed of it startled me, though perhaps I had already been preparing myself for years. Before the contracts were finalized, I walked through the house one last time. The key turned easily, the same key I had handed to Thomas on his wedding day. I remembered the tears in my eyes then, how proud I felt to see him begin a life of his own under a roof I had provided. The memory stung as I stepped into the living room, now stripped of warmth for me, its corners holding only silence. I let my hand trail over the banister, the same one little hands had clutched when learning to climb stairs. In the kitchen, I touched the counter where we had once rolled out cookie dough together. Laughter sticky with sugar. Every room had a ghost of the woman I used to be, always giving, always nearby, waiting to be wanted. The sale closed without obstacles. Marjorie placed the check in my hands, the numbers large enough to steady my breath. That evening, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter in careful script. "Thomas and Clarissa, the house has been sold. Your belongings are in storage, prepaid for 3 months. The documents are enclosed with Mr. Redfern. I need time and space to remember who I am beyond what I've been to you. Please respect that." I sealed the envelope and left it on the kitchen table, where it would greet them before anything else. The knock rattled my door like thunder. Before I could rise from the armchair, it became pounding, urgent, furious. When I opened it, Thomas stood there, pale from the late afternoon sun, jaw tight, eyes wild. "How could you?" His voice broke between anger and disbelief. "You sold our house while we were gone. The children grew up there. Mom, their rooms, their memories, you erased all of it." I stepped aside, letting him in, though the air between us carried more weight than the walls. He paced my small living room, hands dragging through his hair, as if the action alone could unravel the truth he didn't want to accept. "It was never your house," I said softly, though the words cut. "It was mine. I bought it. I finished the payments. The law knew it, even if you chose to forget. And so is my life. Thomas, it is mine." He stopped pacing, staring at me as though I'd spoken in another language. "You blindsided us. Where are we supposed to go now? Where will the kids sleep? They have 3 months of storage paid and enough time to find a new place." I replied, "You and Clarissa are capable. You've always been. You could have talked to me." He shouted, though there was less fire behind it now, only desperation. I tried, in small ways. For years, I answered, steady, but I was always too much. Wasn't I too present, too eager, too inconvenient? He sagged onto the sofa, head in his hands, the fury dissolving into a weary silence. I remained standing, calm, watching my son wrestle with a reality he had never expected me to claim. After Thomas left, silence wrapped around me again, but this time it did not crush. It steadied. I poured myself a cup of tea, opened my notebook, and stared at the blank page until a decision surfaced, clear and undeniable. For decades I had set my dreams aside, filing them behind Thomas's needs, then the grandchildren's. But there was one dream that had never quite died, Paris. 2 weeks later, I stepped off a plane at Charles de Gaulle, clutching a single suitcase and my passport with a trembling hand. The air smelled of rain and diesel, a mixture foreign and thrilling. I rented a small room near Montmartre, narrow stairs creaking beneath my steps. From the window, I could see rooftops lined in slate, chimneys like sentries against the gray sky. The next morning, I enrolled in a watercolor class, advertised on a flyer outside a cafe. The studio was drafty, but filled with light. Our teacher, a man with paint-stained fingers, spoke in slow English and quicker French. I dipped my brush in water, dragged color across paper, and for the first time in years felt creation, not obligation, at my fingertips. Each evening I wrote in a leather-bound journal I had bought near the Seine. The pages filled with fragments the taste of buttered croissants, the curve of Sacré-Cœur against the sky, the strange relief of being anonymous. Loneliness sometimes pressed in, sharp and sudden, especially at night. I would call Julia and Mason, my grandchildren, on video. They showed me drawings, loose teeth, a soccer trophy. I smiled, careful to keep the conversation light, never touching the fracture that divided us. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet, holding both ache and freedom in equal measure. One morning in Paris, while the bells of Saint-Pierre tolled across Montmartre, I opened my email and saw Clarissa's name. I almost closed the screen, braced for another defense or demand. But the words that followed were different. Evaden, we're sorry. We've started therapy. It's forcing us to face how we used you, how we excused it as boundaries, when really it was selfishness. I can't undo what I said at the pier, but I can admit it came from fear and pride, not love. We want to change. For Thomas, for the children, for you. If you'll allow it. I read the message 3 times, my chest tightening. It wasn't absolution, but it was the first unvarnished truth I'd heard from her. Later that week, I found Thomas waiting at a cafe terrace on Rue Lepic. He looked thinner, older somehow, with shadows beneath his eyes. I had to see you, he said, standing as if unsure whether to hug me. We sat with small cups of bitter espresso between us, the air cool and sharp. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, softly, he said, I never saw you as a full person, only as Mom. The woman who fixed everything, who gave without end. I didn't ask who you were beyond that. The admission startled me more than anger ever had. His voice held no excuse, only recognition. I stared at the steam curling from my cup, searching for words. I let myself be only that. I admitted, but I can't go back to it. He nodded, eyes down. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But something small shifted between us, an opening, fragile and uncertain. When the plane dipped over Charleston Harbor, I felt the city rise to meet me. The church steeples, the sweep of the Cooper River, the familiar red brick of downtown. It was home, but no longer the place I had left. I had changed, and I needed a life that reflected it. Within a week, I signed a lease on a modest townhouse tucked behind the library where I had once worked. 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, sunlight in the mornings. Mine. For the first time in decades, my living space belonged solely to me. Thomas helped carry in a few boxes, his manner subdued but careful. Clarissa stopped by once, bringing a pie from the bakery down the street. Her tone measured. We spoke politely, not pretending the past hadn't happened, but not tearing open the wound either. I made it clear, in a voice steady but kind, I would not be a rescuer anymore. No loans, no bailouts, no last-minute savior. I would see the grandchildren on my scheduled weekends we arranged in advance. time that was truly ours. They both nodded, though I saw the flicker of unease in Clarissa's eyes. The first real test came sooner than I expected. A Thursday evening. The phone buzzed. Clarissa's voice, tight with strain. Evadne, could you possibly take the kids tomorrow night? Something came up with Thomas's work, and it would help. I closed my eyes, picturing Julia's eager smile, Mason's laugh. My heart ached, but my resolve held. Not this weekend, I said gently. We'll see each other next Saturday, as planned. There was a silence on the line, followed by a quiet, "All right." She hung up. I set the phone down, my pulse quick, but steady. The house around me felt solid, as though the walls themselves approved. Boundaries were not rejection. They were the shape of respect, finally taking root. By midsummer, the rhythms of our lives had shifted into something steadier, quieter. Thomas and Clarissa had settled into a smaller rented house west of the Ashley. Nothing like the showpiece home I had once bought for them. The siding needed paint, the yard sloped unevenly, and the kitchen was cramped. But it breathed with their own effort instead of my sacrifice. On a warm Saturday afternoon, they invited me over for a barbecue. The scent of charcoal drifted across the lawn as Thomas tended the grill in an apron smudged with sauce. Clarissa set out mismatched plates on a picnic table beneath a pecan tree. The children tore across the grass barefoot, squealing, their laughter carrying through the neighborhood like music. I arrived with a tart I had learned to bake in Paris. A simple arrangement of berries over almond cream. Julia's eyes went wide. "You made this?" she asked, as though I had conjured it from magic. Mason tugged at my sleeve, wanting to show me the fort he and his friends had built from lawn chairs and blankets. For the first time in years, I sat among them and did not feel like a guest to be tolerated or an obligation to be hidden. The space was imperfect but honest. Stripped of pretenses, Clarissa poured me sweet tea, her hand brushing mine for a moment. A silent acknowledgement of the distance we had crossed. As twilight softened the sky, I looked around the table's sticky fingers. Mismatched laughter, smoke curling into the warm air, and felt the truth settle into me. Love, when given freely, is a gift, but respect is its receipt. The proof that the gift has value. Without both, the purchase fails. I set down my glass and watched Julia chase fireflies across the yard, her giggles sparking like light against the darkening trees. What we keep, I realized, is not the house or the money, but the fragile balance between love and respect.